Let's jump in and begin the discussion on this domain. And I think that a lot of this is probably going to be a review for many of you based off of the background that you provided me. But there are some definitions that we really need to go through and try to enumerate the best that we possibly can. At a high level, whenever we're talking about risk management and personnel security, we want to get into the practice of what we typically will call good cyber hygiene. And in order for us to do that, we need to come up with ways that we can manage our information security. Usually those are done with security policies. Typically in the dealing with government systems, few of you are probably familiar with the governance. Once we get to a point where we receive an authority to operate, ATO, then we can actually put the app or the system on the network after we've met all the compliance. But essentially, how you're practicing security, how you're going through and really evaluating what you have to make sure that you're doing your due diligence and practicing due care with the intent that you likely will always have some sort of POAM. And it's just a living, breathing document that helps you govern and practice good cyber hygiene. And at a high level, that's what we're trying to do. We can't eliminate all risk, but we can sure try. If you've been involved with any type of hiring or firing in the past, one of the hardest things to do is firing somebody. One of the easiest things to do is bring in somebody. Well, it's not easy, because I was going to say one of the easiest things to do is hiring somebody, but it also can be difficult because you want to make sure that the person's going to be a good fit for the team. And so when we're going through and talking about how a lot of these things work in this domain and dealing with people, usually it is around the ways that we can look back to the personnel security policies. So issues or problems or any compromises that we may have typically will be involved with the malfeasance of somebody on our staff. So that could be a bad thing, like they deliberately did something, but also just maybe the misconfiguration or something that was done that they thought that they did, but that maybe they didn't do. And so those types of things come up. And what we can do is try to quantify how long things take based off of the procedural documents. I asked earlier about how to serve a volleyball, and we went through and Drew told us exactly how to do it. And there's always ways that we can procedurally go through and do a bunch of different things, including but not limited to hiring new people, screening the people, making sure that they're trained, and are they a good fit for the team? Because the position within the organization typically will have an expertise that it needs or a gap that it needs, and by making sure that you bring on the right person, you can ensure that all the important elements of that particular business function are needed. And so based off of that, we can typically have you come up with a job responsibility, you figure out what the classifications are, you screen them, maybe do a background investigation, then you onboard them, and then you make them do the security awareness training. All the while, we're trying to practice these types of security issues. And we're going to jump into that here, the next slide. So let's first jump in and talk about this concept of separation of duties and something that's close to that, job rotation. In reality, many times the separation of duties is more of a concept, especially in a small business. But if you can afford to do separation of duties, which in a 30 to 50-person company may not be able to, but you start going north in that into 100 to 10,000 people, you want to have more depth on the bench. And to do that, you want to make sure that any duty that is considered critical or significant or sensitive, you want to have multiple people that can help at a high level. And so why do we do separation of duties? Well, if we have one person that has access to do something in God mode on our systems, then that is usually a ripe thing to look at for us to figure out how can we kind of break that up tangibly to make sure that we aren't having that person not be able to do their job, but also we want to force people to have to collude with other people in order to try to detect fraud. And so by enforcing separation of duties, we can typically do that because, as you see on the screen right here, we try to prevent any single points of failure, but also if they want to do things that are bad, they'll have to get in bed with somebody else from another department. And so, like for instance, the administrator task here, the example that I'm showing, shows 5 administrative tasks. And so instead of allowing one person that has God mode to do all of these, we break it up into these 5 different components. We break it up in a way that's meaningful, and then we give more depth on the bench, but also it helps to, for some bad things, it helps to kind of squeeze out any type of fraud or theft or sabotage. And it can, on the good side, it can help with redundant tasks as well. So if there's things that need automation, if you have one person that's pulling a lever every day at 2 o'clock in the morning, and we know that's something that can be automated, having these separation of duties and rotating employees, like for these job positions, is the way that an organization can improve its overall security. Knowledge redundancy, having multiple people that are capable of performing the work at any given time, helps management sleep better and make sure that you don't experience serious downtime or productivity if things go awry. And so in this particular case here, let's just take a look at how this works. So cross-training, job rotation. If you take a look here, is file management here, and then database management here. Network management is right, and database management down here. And so you rotate to different things. So you have cross-training, but there's one thing that isn't said here, right? If you're doing separation of duties and you're doing job rotation, we would need to also do something else with these users' access permissions. What would we need to do here to make sure that we don't have what's called privilege creep? As you move from job to job, we want to make sure that somebody doesn't have more than needed to do their job. So we practice what's called the principle of least privilege, and by doing that, we revoke them. Or we could make them temporal or time based, where maybe for this month you have this, next month you have this. So we want to definitely try to do that the best that we possibly can. So for purposes of your exam, I would say here, and I'm trying to be meaningful, I would say there's 100% chance, CISSP, that these 2 terms will show up on your exam: separation of duties and job rotation. So as we're going through and bringing on new people, we want to practice security, right? We're practicing good cyber hygiene. And as we're bringing these people on, we want them to sign their life away to us, right? We want them to read the rules and how we're actually enforcing them. And so we get them to sign different policies, right? Maybe as part of the onboarding. The acceptable use policy is the splash page that typically when you're logging onto the network, you'll see, hey, everything you're about to do is being recorded, not only for quality assurance purposes, but just in case you do something you shouldn't be doing. In addition to that acceptable use policy, we have these things called an NDA. And so that's a non-disclosure agreement that typically when former employees bring or come on to the company, they're reminded when they leave that they signed a non-disclosure agreement to make sure that they don't tell people what we were working on. Sometimes you see this non-compete agreement, but if you live in a right to work state, usually those are not enforceable. But for purposes of your exam, the acceptable use policy, the NDA, and the non-compete agreement are things you may see on the exam, but usually they don't show up their ugly heads. In addition to that, there's certain things that we sometimes will see that are different agreements that we usually will see in the service industry. Let me bring up a sample here of one of them that we typically will help with the customers. So this is usually what our service level agreement looks like. Anybody that we're managing security for, we have a SLA that we usually will identify with, we'll review this entire document with the customer to come up with what we call it. Usually it's the priority. We give examples of what we feel meet each one of those different SLAs, and it's tabulature in nature here, where it's enumerated from critical up top, high, medium, low to low priority or no priority, and then what we typically will guarantee for response times over on the right-hand side. Usually within 5 minutes, we're responding to any of these tickets that come through or issues that come up. And based on the response times, usually the closer that this one gets to zero, the closer that it gets to zero, usually the more money managed services providers can charge. Why is that? The closer that the response times get to zero, the more that managed service providers can charge. Everything keeps coming back to that three-headed monster, the CIA triad, right? The availability component. If somebody is down, like I mentioned, a couple that were that I've already given you throughout the day that we've dealt with in the last month, where the customers were down, and if it's an outage, all hell's breaking loose trying to fix it. So at a high level, that's what we typically will see from an SLA. And in addition to that, what we can also see are some other metrics that are included with that, depending on what you're offering or what the vendor that you're buying stuff for has to play with. It can be the uptime, the load, the responsibilities. And in addition to this, yes, 5 nines, right? So we want to do 9, 9, and then 5 all together. Sometimes you'll actually see another 2 more places right here. But that essentially means that you're having uptime all the time, and that it's fault tolerant, it's load balanced, it's got some sort of round robin in there. And so at a high level, what the vendors will do is they'll not only give you these, the vendors will not only do these service level agreements, but they'll also tell you, what industrial standards they have applied for. And we'll talk about those here in a second. But essentially, that's what we typically will see in business.